Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born with the willpower to wield every lantern ring. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The room smelled of antiseptic and shattered dreams. At 4 years old, Izuku Midoriya didn't know the word antiseptic, but he knew the smell. It was the clean, sharp scent of places where people were told news they didn't want to hear. He sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, his little legs in their red sneakers dangling a foot above the polished floor. He swung them back and forth, a nervous metronome counting down the seconds to his future. His mother, Inko, sat in a chair beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white mountains in a pale, trembling landscape. Her smile was a fragile, paper-thin thing, stretched taut over a well of anxiety Izuku could feel rolling off her in waves. Across from them, Dr. Tsubasa leaned back in his chair, a pair of oversized spectacles perched on his nose. He held up an X-ray, the image of a small foot glowing against the light box on the wall. It was Izuku's foot. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," the doctor began, his voice gentle but devoid of the warmth Izuku had hoped for. "It's unusual in this day and age, but not unheard of. You see this extra joint in his pinky toe?" He pointed a pen at a small, dark space in the bone structure. Izuku craned his neck to see, fascinated by the image of his own skeleton. Research from the dawn of quirks correlated the lack of this joint with the presence of a quirk factor, the doctor continued, sliding into a well-rehearsed explanation. "It's a vestigial trait, a leftover from a time before humanity evolved. Those with quirks don't have it. Izuku, as you can see, does." The words floated in the air, clinical and detached. Izuku didn't understand vestigial or correlated, but he understood the look on his mother's face as her fragile smile finally crumbled. "So, he's..." she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, but your son is quirkless," Dr. Tsubasa said, the words landing like stones. He turned his kind, pitying eyes to Izuku. "You're not going to develop a quirk, son. It's best you accept it. You can still have a wonderful life. A wonderful life." The phrase was an insult. A wonderful life wasn't a life without a quirk. A wonderful life was saving people with a fearless smile, just like All Might. A wonderful life was being a hero. The drive home was a silent, hollow affair. Inko gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road but seeing nothing. Izuku was strapped into his car seat in the back, clutching his All Might action figure so hard its plastic edges dug into his palm. He didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the finality of the doctor's words a leaden weight in his stomach. He was a blank page in a world filled with vibrant, superpowered stories. An anomaly. A mistake. By the time they got back to their small apartment, the sun had begun to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the living room. Inko moved on autopilot, starting dinner with robotic, jerky movements. Izuku didn't move from the doorway, his red sneakers rooted to the spot. Later, after a dinner that tasted like ash, Izuku found himself in the computer room. The chair was too big for him, but he spun it around and clicked the mouse, his small hand navigating to his favorite bookmark. The video loaded, grainy and old but more real to him than anything else in the world. "Fear not, citizens! Hope has arrived!" There he was. All Might. His booming laugh echoed from the cheap speakers, a sound that could single-handedly hold back the tide of despair. He carried a dozen people on his back, his signature smile blazing like a second sun, a fire burning away the smoke and destruction of a disaster site. "Because I am here!" Izuku watched it once. Then twice. On the third loop, the tears he had held back all day finally came. They started as silent streams, then grew into heaving, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire tiny frame. He didn't understand the genetics, the biology, the cold, hard science of it all. He just understood the gaping chasm that had opened between who he was and who he wanted to be. The door creaked open. Inko stood there, her face a portrait of maternal agony. She saw her son, bathed in the flickering light of his idol, his small body convulsing with a grief too large for it to contain. She rushed forward, her own tears flowing freely now, and wrapped him in a hug. "I'm sorry, Izuku," she choked out, burying her face in his messy green hair. I'm so sorry. I wish things were different. Her words were meant to comfort, but they were confirmation. She was sorry. She was giving up on his dream, too. The final pillar of his hope crumbled. But as Izuku cried, something else was happening. Something deeper than sorrow. It was a desperate, primal refusal to let go. He was 4 years old, and he had just been handed a death sentence for his soul. But his soul refused to die. He pulled back from his mother's embrace, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, where All Might stood triumphant. The image was frozen, a perfect tableau of heroism. "Mom," he hiccuped, his voice thick with tears and a strange, new intensity. Can I be a hero too?" It was the last, desperate plea of a drowning boy. He didn't just want to be a hero. He needed to be. It was the very core of his being. It was his reason to exist. In that moment, his desire wasn't a flimsy childhood wish. It was an unbreakable vow. It was an act of pure, indomitable willpower, and the universe, in its infinite and mysterious way, responded. A soft, ethereal chime, like a single, perfect note struck on a crystal bell, echoed in the quiet room. On the middle finger of his outstretched hand, a point of light bloomed. It was a brilliant, impossible emerald green, the color of new leaves and deep, hidden forests. It swirled and coalesced, forming a shimmering, translucent band of energy around his finger. It looked, for all the world, like a ring made of solid light. Inko gasped, her tears stopping mid-fall. Izuku stared, his sobs catching in his throat. The ring pulsed with a gentle, steady light, casting a verdant glow on his face. It felt warm, like a promise. It felt real. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light flickered, wavered, and dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the ghost of a green afterimage burned into their retinas. "Izuku, what was that?" Inko whispered, her voice filled with a disbelieving hope. Izuku looked from his empty finger to the screen and back again. He didn't have an answer. He was still quirkless, according to the top medical expert, but for one shining moment, something inside him had reached out and touched the world. And the world had touched back. The years that followed were a special kind of torment, a purgatory of potential. The green light, the emerald spark, as Izuku had dubbed it in his notebooks, was not a fantasy. It was, however, frustratingly inconsistent. It would appear at the oddest moments, always tied to that same fierce, bone-deep resolve he'd felt in front of the computer. When he saw a stray cat stuck in a tree and was desperately trying to figure out how to get it down, the ring would flicker. When he was stubbornly refusing to admit defeat in a board game against his mother, a faint green glow would sheathe his finger. But he couldn't control it. He couldn't summon it on command. It was a reflex, not a tool. This fact was not lost on Katsuki Bakugo. "Still playing with your imaginary nightlight, Deku?" Bakugo sneered. They were 7, standing by a creek in the woods behind their neighborhood. Izuku was trying to show him, to prove he wasn't useless, that he had something. "It's not imaginary, Kaken. It's real. It's my quirk." Izuku insisted, his fists clenched. He focused, trying to rekindle that feeling of absolute determination. "I will show him. I will prove I'm not a Deku." A weak, watery green light flickered into existence around his finger. It was pale and unstable. Bakugo just laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Wow. So scary." He held up his own hand, and a series of sharp, crackling explosions erupted from his palm. The smell of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin filled the air. "That's a quirk, you loser. A real one. All you have is a lame party trick." To prove his point, he shoved Izuku. Izuku stumbled backward, his arms flailing. As he fell, a new feeling surged through him, not determination, but a desperate will to protect himself. "Don't get hurt." The green light on his finger suddenly brightened and expanded, forming a flat, shimmering green disk of energy in front of him. It looked like a small, clumsy shield. It was the first time it had ever taken a shape. Pop! Bakugo let off a small, contemptuous explosion against the construct. The emerald shield shattered like cheap glass, the fragments of light dissolving before they hit the ground. Izuku landed hard in the dirt, the wind knocked out of him. The fall hurt, but Bakugo's laughter hurt more. See? Useless. You can't do anything. You're a Deku. From that day on, the emerald spark became another source of ridicule. It was the Dekulite, proof not of a quirk, but of how pathetic he was. He was so desperate that he'd invented a useless little sparkle to make himself feel better. He soon learned to hide it, to suppress the flicker of will that might cause it to appear and invite more scorn. But in private he studied it. His hero analysis for the future notebooks evolved. Alongside detailed sketches of Mount Lady's gigantification and Kamui Woods' lacquered chain prison, there were pages dedicated to himself. Quirk analysis, Emerald Spark, tentative name, trigger, seems to be related to strong emotional resolve. Not just wanting something, but a deep, powerful will to make it happen. Documented appearances, age 4, in front of PC. Trigger, refusal to accept quirkless diagnosis. Manifestation, bright, solid ring, age 6, trying to reach a book on the top shelf. Trigger, I will get that book down. Manifestation, faint glow, age 7, facing Kaken by the creek. Trigger, I will protect myself. Manifestation, weak shield construct. Shattered easily, age 9, during a difficult math test. Trigger, I will solve this problem. Manifestation, very faint brief flicker. Conclusion, the strength and stability of the light seem directly proportional to the intensity and purity of my willpower. A passing desire creates a flicker. A life or death vow creates a solid object. Problem, my willpower is inconsistent. My body is weak. How can I have a strong will if I have a weak foundation? This last point became his new obsession. He was 10 now, and the gap between him and his peers was a gaping canyon. Their quirks were developing, becoming stronger, more refined. Bakugo could create powerful, directed explosions. Others could stretch, harden their skin, or communicate with animals. And Izuku could sometimes make a green glow if he tried really, really hard. He started training. It began simply. Push-ups in his room until his arms trembled. Sit-ups until his core ached. He would run laps around his apartment complex until his lungs felt like they were on fire. It was a pathetic display. He could barely do 5 push-ups. He was gassed after one lap, but he didn't stop. Every night, he pushed himself a little further. And he noticed something. As he lay on the floor, panting, muscles screaming, his body begging him to quit, a single thought would burn through the haze of exhaustion: one more. And with that thought, that simple, stubborn act of will, the green ring would appear. It was still faint, but it was steady. It was like a tiny, personal cheerleader, a verdant flame that burned brightest when he was at his limit. It became his companion in his secret, lonely training. The pain was proof he was trying. The light was proof it was worth it. For the next 4 years, this was his life. School was a nightmare of isolation and bullying. Home was a sanctuary of study and relentless, painful training. He dissected heroes' moves, their support gear, their interview answers, filling notebook after notebook. But more importantly, he dissected himself, pushing his physical and mental limits, all in service of understanding the strange, fickle power that lived on his finger. He learned to associate the feeling of burning muscles and searing lungs with the feeling of his will crystallizing. He was chasing a dragon, and the only way to catch it was to become stronger. He still dreamed of being a hero like All Might, but now, a new, more personal goal burned alongside it, to one day create a light that would not shatter. The stench of salt, rust, and decay was overwhelming. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had long since become an illegal dumping ground, a forgotten coastline groaning under the weight of society's refuse. Mountains of broken appliances, tangled fishing nets, and discarded furniture were slowly being reclaimed by the sea, creating a hazardous, metallic jungle. It was the perfect place for a 14-year-old boy to train in secret. For months, Izuku had been coming here. The heavy, awkward trash was the ultimate form of resistance training. He had graduated from simple bodyweight exercises. Now, he was moving the world, one piece of garbage at a time. He stood before his current nemesis, a massive, rust-eaten commercial washing machine, half buried in the sand. He had been trying to haul it clear of the tide line for the better part of an hour, and it hadn't budged more than a few inches. His body was a symphony of agony. His palms were raw and blistered despite his work gloves. His back screamed in protest. Every muscle fiber felt frayed and torn. Sweat pasted his green hair to his forehead, and his breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. "It's no use," a voice in his head whispered. It sounded suspiciously like Bakugo. "You're just a weak, quirkless Deku playing in the trash." The doctor's face swam in his vision. "It's best you accept it." His mother's tear-streaked face. "I'm sorry, Izuku." He stumbled back, his legs giving out. He fell to his knees in the coarse sand, staring at the monolithic washing machine. It was a monument to his failure. His vision blurred, not with tears, but with pure exhaustion. This was it. This was his limit. He couldn't do it. He hung his head, the defeat a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. For a moment, he let the despair wash over him. Maybe they were all right. Maybe this was all a pointless, pathetic exercise in denial. Maybe he should just go home, throw his notebooks in the trash with the rest of this garbage, and learn to live a wonderful life. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling, scraped and dirty. They weren't the hands of a hero. Then, through the fog of his exhaustion, another image surfaced. All Might, standing on a burning bus, his smile a beacon. "It's fine now." "Why?" "Because I am here." That smile wasn't just for the cameras. It was a promise. It was a declaration of intent. It was the physical manifestation of a will so powerful it could bend reality to its whim, inspiring hope in millions. All Might didn't become the symbol of peace because he was strong. He was strong because he had decided, with every fiber of his being, to be the symbol of peace. Izuku's eyes narrowed. The pain in his body was a distant roar. The voices of doubt were fading whispers. A new thought, clear and sharp as a diamond, cut through the noise. He wasn't training to get a quirk. He was training his quirk. His body wasn't the source of his power, it was the vessel. The engine was his will. And right now, that engine was sputtering. He planted his raw hands in the sand and pushed himself back to his feet, his legs shaking violently. He faced the washing machine, his shadow long in the late afternoon sun. "No," he whispered, the word a dry rasp. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was louder, clearer, ringing with a conviction he hadn't felt in 10 years. "No, I will not give up. I will move this. I will clean this beach. I will get into UA. And I will be a hero." He wasn't hoping. He wasn't wishing. He was declaring a fact that the world had not yet caught up with. It was the vow. The unbreakable vow, forged not in tears and desperation, but in sweat, pain, and absolute, unyielding resolve. Bzzzzzzzzz chime. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet of the beach. It was no longer a faint, ethereal note. It was a clear, resonant tone, a hum of immense power settling into place. On his middle finger, the emerald spark didn't just flicker to life. It snapped into existence. The light was not pale or translucent. It was a solid, deep, vibrant emerald, so intense it seemed to drink the sunlight. The ring of energy was no longer a shimmering mirage. It was a solid band, humming with contained power. A cool, steady warmth spread from it, not just through his hand, but through his entire being, washing away the fatigue, silencing the pain, leaving only a core of pure, focused determination. He stared at it, mesmerized. This was it. This was the real thing. He raised his hand, the green ring casting a glow on his face. He needed to make something. Not a clumsy shield or a weak ram. He needed to give this incredible power a form. He needed to shape his will. What was the symbol of his will? What was the source of it all? The answer was immediate, instinctive. All Might. He didn't think about the mechanics. He just focused on the image in his mind, the one he'd memorized from countless videos and posters. The broad shoulders, the V-shaped torso, the iconic Golden Age costume, the twin antennae of hair, the indomitable smile. He poured all his admiration, all his years of study, all his unbreakable resolve into that single, perfect image. The light from the ring extended, flowing like liquid jade into the air before him. It twisted, solidified, and sculpted itself with impossible precision, and there, hovering a foot in front of his face, was the result. It was a perfect, 6-inch-tall construct of All Might. It wasn't a clumsy caricature. It was an exquisitely detailed sculpture of pure, solid light. The muscles were perfectly defined. The lines of the costume were sharp and clean. The face was captured in that classic, fearless smile. It didn't waver or flicker. It was solid, real, and radiating a faint emerald aura. Izuku Midoriya stood on the trash-strewn beach, panting, his body pushed to its absolute limit. He stared at the glowing green hero floating before him, a perfect miniature of his dream, created by the one power he truly owned. Tears welled in his eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were not tears of sorrow or frustration. They were tears of validation. Of triumph. He had found the key. His quirk wasn't a spark, a light show, or a party trick. His quirk was his willpower. And it was the strongest power in the universe. The greenest light, the light of his own indomitable will, reflected in his tear-filled eyes, burning with the promise of the hero he was now certain he would become. The wind on the rooftop was a lonely, indifferent thing. It whipped past Izuku's ears, a hollow whistle that seemed to mock the crushing silence in his soul. It tugged at the edges of his black kakurin, the same uniform he'd worn with a naive sense of pride just that morning. Now, it felt like a shroud. All Might was gone. The skeletal man had transformed back into the mountain of muscle, offered a few perfunctory words of caution, and leaped away, leaving Izuku standing on the precipice of his own shattered world. The words echoed in the empty space the hero had left behind, each one a hammered blow against the fragile stained glass of his dream. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, kid. No, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. The finality of it was absolute. This wasn't a bully's taunt or a doctor's clinical diagnosis. This was the symbol of peace, the man whose every word was gospel, telling him to surrender. The one person in the entire world who he thought would understand had instead gently, kindly, and irrevocably slammed the door in his face. Izuku's hand drifted to his middle finger. A few hours ago, on the shores of Dagoba Beach, he had felt like a god. He had shaped his will into a perfect, glowing effigy of his idol. He had finally grasped the key to his power. All that progress, all that sweat and pain and triumph, it all felt like a child's fantasy now. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to summon the feeling. He focused on the memory of his vow on the beach. I will be a hero. The words felt hollow now, a lie he had told himself. There was no surge of power, no warmth spreading through his veins. He strained, pushing with a desperate, pathetic whimper. Please, nothing. Not a flicker. Not a spark. Of course. He understood, with a clarity that was itself a form of agony. His quirk was his willpower. And how could he have the will to be a hero when the number one hero in the world had just told him it was impossible? All Might hadn't just broken his dream, he had cut the fuel line to his very soul. He was quirkless again. Truly, fundamentally quirkless. The emerald spark was just a symptom of a hope that was now officially dead. He trudged toward the rooftop access door, his feet dragging as if they were cast in lead. The clanging metal of the stairwell was the only sound as he descended, each step taking him further down from the sky, further down into the darkness of his new reality. He didn't see the bustling city through the grimy windows. He didn't hear the distant sirens. The vibrant, super-powered world he had loved and studied with such devotion had become a flat, gray, monochrome photograph. He emerged onto the street, a ghost in the river of afternoon commuters. People bustled past him, their faces full of purpose, their minds on dinner plans and evening television. They were all blissfully unaware that the universe had just ended for a 14-year-old boy in their midst. He didn't know where he was going. Home, presumably. He had to go home and tell his mother that she was right to be sorry. That Dr. Tsubasa was right to be realistic. That Kaken was right all along. He was just a useless Deku who couldn't do anything. The thought was so bitter it made him want to retch. A decade of relentless bullying, of being treated as less than human, had been endurable because he had the secret, burning conviction that one day, he would prove them all wrong. He would stand on the stage at UA, he would debut as a hero, and he would save people with a smile. Now, that conviction was gone, and all that remained was the raw, festering wound of their words. His path was aimless, a meandering trudge through the labyrinthine streets of Muzudafu. He was a ship without a rudder, drifting on an ocean of despair. And it was then that the world decided it wasn't quite done with him yet. Boom! The sound was a physical blow, a concussive wave of force that rattled the windows of nearby shops and vibrated up through the soles of his red sneakers. A plume of black smoke, thick and oily, billowed into the sky from a few blocks away. A villain attack. A week ago, a day ago, even an hour ago, his reaction would have been instantaneous. He would have been running toward the danger, his notebook already in hand, his mind buzzing with analysis and feverish excitement. Today, he flinched. He stopped. And he felt nothing. No excitement. No fear. Just a vast, tired emptiness. It had nothing to do with him. That was the world of heroes, the world he had been officially exiled from. He should have turned around. He should have taken a different route home. He should have buried his head and walked away. He didn't. Against every rational thought, his feet began to move. It wasn't the instinctive, heroic impulse he'd always claimed it was. This was something different. It was a morbid curiosity, a self-destructive compulsion. He was a ghost drawn to a funeral. He wanted to see them, the real heroes, with their real quirks, do the job he was told he was unfit for. It was a form of punishment, a way to rub salt in the fresh, gaping wound All Might had carved in his chest. He rounded a corner, and was met with a wall of people. A crowd had formed a semicircle, a respectful distance from the chaos. Everyone had their phones out, a forest of tiny screens recording the disaster for social media. The air was thick with panicked chatter, sirens, and the acrid smell of smoke. What's going on? It's some kind of sludge villain. He's got a hostage. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? Izuku, his slight frame an advantage for once, slipped through the gaps in the crowd, his analytical mind kicking in out of pure, miserable habit. He emerged at the front, near the police barricade, and took in the scene. It was a narrow shopping arcade, now a disaster zone. Fires licked at the storefronts, set by the violent thrashing of the hostage. The hero backdraft was working tirelessly, creating cordons of water to keep the flames from spreading, but he couldn't get close to the villain itself. Kamui Woods was there, too, evacuating civilians, but the fire kept him at bay. Wood quirks were notoriously vulnerable to flame, and then there was Death Arms. The brawling hero was trying to land a punch, to get a grip on the amorphous enemy, but it was like trying to punch water. His fist sank into the viscous, slime-like body with a disgusting squelch, and he was forced to pull back before he was engulfed himself. The villain. It was the same one All Might had saved him from earlier. The one from the bottle. A cold dread trickled down Izuku's spine. Did it fall out of his pocket when I grabbed onto him? Is this my fault? The thought was a spark of horror in the gray numbness. He watched, frozen, as the sludge villain laughed, a gurgling, horrible sound. It was a writhing, shifting mass of filth and eyeballs, and deep within its swirling form, something was struggling. A person. A hostage. The villain was using their body, and more importantly, their quirk, to rampage. Explosions, small and large, burst from the sludge, making it impossible for the heroes to approach. Explosions. A familiar, terrifying popping sound. The smell of nitroglycerin cutting through the smoke. Izuku's blood ran cold. The sludge shifted, and for a moment, he saw the hostage's face clearly. Spiky ash-blonde hair. A school uniform identical to his own. And furious, terrified red eyes. It was Kaken, Katsuki Bakugo. His childhood friend. His tormentor. The one person who embodied everything Izuku was not, confident, powerful, and destined for greatness. And he was suffocating. He was drowning in a monster that Izuku had inadvertently set free. The sight broke through the apathy. The gray world snapped back into terrifying, hyper-saturated color. The screams of the crowd, the heat of the fire, the stench of sludge and smoke, it all crashed into him at once. He saw Bakugo struggle, the desperate, panicked explosions that were only making the villain stronger. He saw the heroes standing back, unable to find a way in, their powers ineffective. He saw the crowd, filming a boy's death for their entertainment. And then, for one horrifying, crystal clear moment their eyes met. Across the chaos, through the smoke and fire, Izuku saw Bakugo's eyes. They weren't filled with the usual arrogant fury or contemptuous sneer. They were wide, pleading, drowning in sheer, primal terror. It was a look that said, "Help me. I'm going to die." Something inside Izuku Midoriya snapped. It wasn't a noble decision. It wasn't a heroic choice. It was a switch being flipped in the deepest, darkest part of his brain. The despair from All Might's rejection, the guilt of causing this disaster, the years of repressed frustration from Bakugo's bullying, the white-hot fury at the heroes for their inaction, the disgust at the voyeuristic crowd, all of it, every negative, painful, soul-crushing emotion he had ever felt, coalesced into a single, incandescent point of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a rage that burned hotter than any fire. A rage at the villain for daring to hurt someone in front of him. A rage at the heroes for their powerlessness. A rage at All Might for telling him to give up. A rage at himself for being a weak, useless Deku who stood by and did nothing while his friend, his rival, his tormentor, his friend, was dying. He didn't feel a gentle chime. He heard a grating, discordant shriek, like metal tearing apart. A wave of heat, violent and sickening, erupted from his core. His blood felt like it was boiling. His heart hammered against his ribs like a war drum, and a blood-red mist clouded the edges of his vision. He looked down at his hand. Not the one that usually housed the emerald spark. His other hand. On his ring finger, a new light was being born. It wasn't the hopeful, life-affirming green of a new leaf. It was the color of a deep, arterial wound. A furious, bubbling, blood-red light that swirled into a ring of solid rage, pulsing with a malevolent, destructive energy. It was so intense it seemed to suck the color out of the world around it, leaving everything muted in comparison to its crimson glare. The green ring was a promise of what he could build. This red ring was a promise of what he could destroy. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He acted. He broke through the police tape. "Kid, no! Get back here!" Death Arms shouted. Izuku didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a crimson-tinted tunnel. At the end of that tunnel was the sludge villain, and the boy it was killing. He wasn't running to save Bakugo with a clever plan from his notebooks. He was charging forward to annihilate the thing that had caused all this pain. Rea agagak. The sound that tore from his throat wasn't a word. It was a raw, guttural scream of pure fury, the cry of an animal pushed past its breaking point. He threw his hand forward, the one with the crimson ring, and the power answered his rage. It didn't form a construct. It didn't take a shape. There was nothing elegant or controlled about it. A torrent of liquid, red energy erupted from the ring. It wasn't a beam, it was a spewing, volcanic torrent of pure, destructive force. It looked like napalm made of blood and fire, and it flew through the air with a horrifying hiss. The heroes stared, frozen in shock. The crowd gasped, their phones now capturing something far more terrifying than a standard villain attack. The crimson energy struck the sludge villain. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. It wasn't like a punch or a blast of water. The moment the red energy made contact, the sludge sizzled. It boiled. It dissolved. The villain let out a gurgling, agonized shriek as the rage-fueled plasma ate away at its body, not pushing it back, but disintegrating it layer by layer. The smell of burnt sewage and something far worse filled the air. Izuku didn't stop. He was lost in the red haze. The rage demanded release, and he gave it everything. He kept screaming, his face a mask of primal fury, his eyes wide and glowing with a faint crimson light of their own. More and more of the terrifying energy poured from his hand, a relentless flood of annihilation. He was saving Bakugo, but it wasn't heroic. It was monstrous. He looked like a demon, wreathed in blood-red light, screaming as he melted his enemy alive. The very heroes who were meant to handle the situation had taken a step back, their faces a mixture of confusion and genuine fear. Was this boy another villain? A secret weapon of the sludge monster? What was this terrifying, uncontrolled quirk? The sludge villain, its mass rapidly diminishing under the onslaught, was forced back by the sheer agony of the attack. Its grip on Bakugo loosened. The blonde-haired boy fell out, collapsing to the pavement, gasping, choking, and staring at Izuku with wide, terrified eyes. But Izuku didn't see him. He didn't see that Bakugo was free. All he saw was the target of his rage. The villain was still moving, still existing. It wasn't enough. It had to be gone. All of it. He took another step forward, raising his hand to deliver another, more powerful blast, ready to completely unmake the creature, to erase it from existence. The red light on his finger flared, brighter and more violent than ever. He was losing himself to it, sinking into the simple, satisfying purity of absolute rage. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. A new presence arrived on the scene, not with a siren, but with a gust of wind so powerful it felt like a physical wall. "I really am pathetic," a deep, familiar voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. Izuku faltered, the crimson torrent from his hand sputtering for a second. "Even though I admonished you," the voice continued, full of self-recrimination and a power that dwarfed everything else on the battlefield. "I wasn't putting what I said into practice. All Might." He had arrived in his magnificent, muscular form, his smile gone, replaced by a grim line of determination. He didn't even look at the weakened sludge villain first. He looked at Izuku, at the crimson light, at the boy who was teetering on the edge of becoming a monster. And then he acted. Texas Smash. All Might threw a punch, not at the villain, but at the air above it. The force of the blow was staggering. It created a miniature tornado, a swirling vortex of wind pressure that ripped through the arcade. It tore the sludge villain apart, scattering its remaining mass into harmless, slimy droplets. It extinguished the fires in an instant, and it slammed into Izuku. The sheer shock of the pressure wave, the sudden, overwhelming change in the atmosphere, was like being doused in ice water. The red haze in his mind shattered. The roar of rage in his ears was replaced by the deafening wind. His scream cut off into a choked gasp. He blinked, and the world came crashing back in. He saw the panicked crowd. He saw the stunned heroes. He saw Bakugo on the ground, safe. He saw All Might, standing like a colossus. He looked down at his hand. The horrifying, blood-red ring flickered, its malevolent light dimming as the rage drained out of him, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. The ring dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind a phantom heat and the nauseating memory of its power. The strength fled his body. The adrenaline, the rage, it was all gone, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. His legs gave out, and he crumpled to his knees on the wet, sludge-spattered asphalt. He stared at his hands, no longer seeing them as his own. They were weapons. They had just unleashed something terrible upon the world. The rain started to fall, a gentle drizzle created by All Might's punch. It washed the grime from the street, but Izuku felt like it could never wash the crimson stain from his soul. Later, after the chaos died down, he was swarmed. Not with praise, but with scorn. "Are you insane, kid?" Death Arms yelled, his face stern. "You could have been killed. And what was that quirk? You have zero control. You could have vaporized the hostage." The other pros chimed in, berating him for his recklessness, for interfering, for his terrifying and unstable power. Meanwhile, they praised Bakugo for his bravery and his powerful quirk. Izuku didn't say a word. He just knelt there, trembling, accepting their words. They were right. He hadn't been in control. He had been a monster. He had saved Kaken, yes, but at what cost? He had terrified everyone, including himself. He finally got to his feet and stumbled away, the crowd parting before him. They weren't looking at him with admiration. They were looking at him with fear, whispering about the rage kid with the scary power. He had stepped onto the stage of a real hero incident, and he hadn't played the part of the hero. He had played the part of the terrifying, unknown variable. He walked home in the rain, soaked to the bone, colder and more alone than he had ever been in his life. The despair from All Might's rejection was now compounded by a new, more potent poison, self-revulsion. He hadn't just failed to be a hero. He had discovered a darkness inside himself more terrifying than any villain. A crimson stain was now etched upon his heroism, a testament to the rage he now knew he was capable of. And he was utterly, completely horrified by it. The walk home was a pilgrimage through a personal hell. Each step was a penance, each splash of a puddle a reminder of the sludge he had fought, and the darker mire now churning within him. The rain had plastered his green hair to his scalp and soaked through his uniform, but the chill he felt had nothing to do with the water. It was a cold that radiated from the inside out, a frostbitten emptiness where his dream used to be. He had expected to feel numb after All Might's rooftop rejection, and he had. But that numbness now seemed like a blessing, a peaceful gray shore before the crimson tide. What he'd done in the shopping arcade was not heroic. It was a horrifying loss of control, a brief, terrifying glimpse into a version of himself he never wanted to see again. The memory of the red energy, that viscous, hateful plasma pouring from his hand, was seared into his mind's eye. It felt parasitic, alien, a power that had used his body as a conduit for its own destructive hunger. The heroes had scolded him. The crowd had stared with fear. And Bakugo hadn't even looked at him. After the medics had checked him over, he'd been led away, surrounded by pros praising his grit, never once glancing back at the boy who had melted a monster to save him. The chasm between them had never felt wider. He finally reached the familiar street of his apartment complex, the journey a blur of shame-filled introspection. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his hand gripping the cold, wet railing. He couldn't go up. Not yet. How could he face his mother? What would he say? "Hi Mom, my day was weird. I found out the #1 hero thinks I'm a lost cause, and then I developed a second, horrifying quirk fueled by pure rage and nearly vaporized the villain in a blind fury. How was your day?" He sank onto the bottom step, the concrete cold and damp beneath him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He didn't cry. He was too exhausted, too hollowed out for tears. He just sat there, a small, pathetic figure shrinking under the weight of his own failure. He was a boy with two quirks, one dependent on a hope he no longer had, the other on a rage he was terrified to touch. What a cruel joke the universe had played on him. "DKU!" The voice was a familiar, angry bark, cutting through the quiet patter of the rain. Izuku's head snapped up. There, at the end of the walkway, stood Katsuki Bakugo. He wasn't wearing his usual arrogant smirk. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders were hunched, and his expression was a complicated, unreadable storm of anger and something else, something Izuku had never seen on his face before. "Kaken?" Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse. Bakugo stomped toward him, his shoes slapping angrily on the wet pavement. He stopped a few feet away, rain dripping from the sharp spikes of his ash-blonde hair. "I didn't ask for your help," he growled, the words sharp but lacking their usual bite. He wasn't looking at Izuku, but at a spot on the ground just to his left. "I didn't need it. I had it handled. You didn't save me." "Got it?" Izuku stared, bewildered. This was Kaken's version of something. A thank you? A confrontation? He couldn't tell. Okay, Kaken, and what the hell was that?" Bakugo's voice grew louder, the anger finally finding its familiar footing. "That red crap. That wasn't your stupid little green light. That was different. What the hell was that?" His eyes, when they finally met Izuku's, were filled with a confusing mix of fury and genuine, unnerving fear. For the first time, Bakugo looked at him like he was a legitimate threat, an unknown quantity, and it was deeply unsettling. I don't know," Izuku answered, and it was the honest truth. The memory made his stomach clench. "You don't know?" Bakugo scoffed, taking a step back. "Don't lie to me, you damn nerd! You've been hiding this, haven't you? All this time, acting like a weak, quirkless nobody. Were you laughing at me? Were you looking down on me this whole time?" The accusation was so absurd, so fundamentally backward, that a bitter, humorless laugh escaped Izuku's lips. "Laughing at you? Kaken, my entire life has been you laughing at me. You think I'd hide a quirk like that?" The horror of it rose in his throat. "I didn't want that. I don't want it." His outburst seemed to stun Bakugo into silence. They stood there for a long moment, the only sound the gentle rain. The image of Bakugo's terrified eyes, pleading from within the sludge, flashed in Izuku's mind. "I'm glad you're okay, Kaken," he said quietly, his voice devoid of any energy. Bakugo flinched as if struck. He stared at Izuku, his jaw working, searching for a retort, a put-down, anything to regain control of the situation. He found nothing. With a frustrated "TCH," he spun on his heel and stomped away, disappearing into the evening gloom without another word. Izuku watched him go, the brief, strange encounter leaving him even more drained. He was right back where he started, alone on a wet staircase with the future as bleak and gray as the evening sky. "I am here!" The voice was a booming, theatrical whisper. It came from the corner of the building, and it was so unexpected, so utterly out of place, that Izuku yelped and scrambled to his feet, spinning around in a panic. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a walking skeleton. The same skeletal man from the rooftop, his baggy white t-shirt and cargo pants hanging off his emaciated frame. All Might. All Might? What are you? How did you? Izuku stammered, his mind reeling. His hero worship, his despair, and his shock all collided, leaving him speechless. In a cloud of steam and a bit of theatrical misdirection, All Might said, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. "I have been looking for you, young man. I needed to talk to you." "Talk to me?" Izuku's voice was barely a whisper. You already said everything on the rooftop. I get it. I can't be a hero. You don't have to tell me again." The words tasted like acid. All Might's face, usually hollow and gaunt, softened with an expression of profound regret. "I have come to apologize." "And to thank you?" Izuku stared at him, his brain refusing to process the words. Apologize? Thank him? For what? For his monstrous, uncontrolled rampage? What I said to you on that roof. All Might began, his voice low and earnest. Was the talk of a man who has grown jaded, a hero past his prime. I told you to be realistic, to give up. But then I saw you at the arcade. Izuku flinched, wrapping his arms around himself. You saw me lose control. I was a monster. No, All Might said, his voice firm, cutting through Izuku's self-loathing. No, young man. You were a hero. The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? No. I wasn't. The pros, they all said I was reckless, dangerous. The top heroes, myself included, stood by while a young man was suffocating. We were paralyzed by the situation, making excuses about our quirk matchups. All Might said, his fist clenching at his sides. But you, a boy I had just crushed with my own foolish words, a boy with no discernible quirk to speak of, saw a person in need of saving, and you were the first one to move. He took a step closer, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Izuku's. Tell me, young man, what did you feel in that moment? When you ran out there? Izuku's mind flashed back. The crimson haze. The boiling rage. He shuddered. I was angry. So angry. At the villain. At everyone for not doing anything. At myself. All Might nodded slowly. I see. The guilt over letting me drop the bottle, the fear for your friend, it all curdled into rage. A powerful, terrifying rage. He paused, his gaze intensifying. And yet, that is not all I saw. I have been a hero for a long time, young man. I saw that rage, yes. But before that, on the rooftop, I saw something else entirely. He gestured to Izuku's hand. Your finger. When you were talking about your dream, it glowed. A green light. Izuku's breath hitched. You saw that? I did. And I recognized that light. It is the light I see in the eyes of every true hero just before they throw themselves into the fray. It is the light of pure, unshakable willpower. All Might said. And then, at the arcade, I saw its opposite. A crimson fire born of pure rage. And then, there was you. A boy caught between them, a boy who ran into danger not because he was strong, but because his body moved before he had a chance to think. All Might's voice resonated with a deep, powerful conviction. In that moment you reminded me what it truly means to be a hero. It is not about having the right quirk. It is about having the right spirit. You, young man, possess the spirit of a true hero. The words were a balm on Izuku's wounded soul. They were everything he had ever wanted to hear, from the one person whose opinion mattered most. The despair that had choked him for hours began to recede, not vanishing, but pulling back like a dark tide. And in the space it left behind, something new began to grow. It started as a warmth in his chest, a tiny, flickering ember. All Might, the greatest hero of all time, was standing in the rain, apologizing to him. He was telling him he was a hero, after a lifetime of being told he was worthless, after the ultimate authority had told him to give up. That same authority was now recanting. He was reversing his judgment. It wasn't a lie. Izuku could see it in the hero's sunken eyes. It was real. The possibility he had mourned was not dead. The door that had been slammed shut was creaking open again. The ember in his chest grew warmer, brighter. It was hope. It wasn't the frantic, desperate hope of a child wishing on a star. This was a deeper, calmer, more profound hope. It was the hope of a condemned man given a pardon, the hope of a wanderer lost in the desert seeing a glimmer of water on the horizon. It was a serene, powerful certainty that things could be, and would be, better. It was the absolute, unshakable belief in a brighter future. As this pure, undiluted hope swelled within him, washing away the lingering stains of his rage and despair, a new sound echoed in the quiet evening. It wasn't the grating shriek of rage or the clear chime of will. It was a soft, melodic hum, like a choir of distant bells. A new light bloomed on the ring finger of his right hand. It was a gentle, serene, and brilliant azure. The color of a perfect summer sky, of a deep and tranquil sea. It coalesced into a beautiful, glowing blue ring, its light pulsing with a calm, steady rhythm. Where the red light had felt hot and parasitic, this blue light felt cool and rejuvenating. Where the green light felt like a tool to be commanded, this felt like a comforting presence, a shield for the soul. The azure glow washed over him, and with it came a wave of incredible peace. The frantic, anxious buzzing that was the constant background noise of his life went silent. The shame, the fear, the self-revulsion, they didn't vanish, but their sharp edges were smoothed away, their power to harm him diminished. He felt centered, calm, hopeful. All Might stared, his jaw agape. The trickle of blood at his lip was forgotten. He had seen the green. He had seen the red. And now, a third, equally powerful light had manifested, born from his own words. Willpower. Rage, and now hope. He breathed, his voice filled with an awe that transcended his own legendary status. He looked at Izuku not as a fan or a student, but as a phenomenon. A miracle. Young man, what is your quirk? Izuku looked down at the glowing blue ring on his finger, then at his other hand, where the phantom feelings of the green and red rings still lingered. I call it emotional spectrum, he said, the name coming to him in a moment of perfect clarity. It seems I can manifest energy based on what I'm feeling. Strong will creates green constructs, intense rage creates that red energy. And this? He looked at the calming blue light. This must be hope. All Might was silent for a long time, his sharp mind working, connecting dots that had been scattered across Izuku's life. A boy whose power was intrinsically tied to the very emotions that define heroism. The will to act, the rage against injustice, and the hope that inspires others. It was too perfect. It was destiny. You are bleeding, Izuku said suddenly, his newfound calm allowing him to notice the thin line of red still on All Might's chin. The hero absently wiped it away. It's nothing. Just the result of a nasty fight a few years back. It's the reason I have a time limit on my hero form. With a sigh, he lifted the side of his shirt, revealing the horrific, swirling vortex of scar tissue that Izuku had glimpsed on the rooftop. But this time, instead of seeing it with panicked horror, Izuku looked at it with the calm, analytical eyes his hope had given him. He saw not a weakness, but a wound that the symbol of peace endured every single day. 5 years ago, All Might said, his voice heavy with memory. My battle with Toxic Chainsaw? This was the result. He carved me up good. I lost my stomach and half my respiratory system. The surgeries have worn me down. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. He let his shirt fall, hiding the wound but not the weariness in his eyes. This is the truth of the symbol of peace. I smiled to stave off the fear I feel inside. I smiled to trick the world into believing I am an invincible pillar. But I am not. I am a man running on fumes, and my fire is dimming. He looked at Izuku, at the serene blue light that still pulsed gently on his finger. "I have been searching," All Might said, his voice dropping to an intense, confidential tone. "Not for a partner. Not for a sidekick. But for a successor." Izuku's heart, which had just found a calm rhythm, began to pound again. "A successor? There is a power, a sacred torch that has been passed down from hero to hero for generations. It is a quirk that stockpiles power, growing stronger with each new user. It is a quirk that can be given to another." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A quirk that could be transferred? Such a thing was thought to be impossible, a myth. "It is called One for All." All Might stood tall, or as tall as his skeletal frame would allow, and he seemed to regain some of his symbolic stature, even in this weakened form. "I had been searching for a worthy vessel to inherit my power, to carry the torch of One for All and become the next symbol of peace. And then I met you. A boy who ran into danger without a second thought. A boy who possesses not one, but three of the core emotional energies of the cosmos. A boy who embodies the very heart of heroism more than anyone I have ever met." He took one final step forward, standing directly in front of Izuku. The rain had softened to a mist, and the streetlights cast a halo around them. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice ringing with the weight of history and the promise of the future. "I have seen your will. I have seen your rage against evil. And I have seen your hope for a better world. Your spirit is already worthy. Your quirk is a miracle that makes you the perfect candidate to not just wield this power, but to master it, to anchor its immense strength with your emotional fortitude." He held out a hand, not in greeting, but as an offering. "I want to give you my quirk. I want to train you to control that incredible spectrum of power within you, and to add my strength to your own. I believe you can become the greatest hero of all time, a symbol not just of peace, but of balance." The blue light on Izuku's finger pulsed, a steady, rhythmic beat. It was a beacon in the darkness of his past, illuminating the path forward. He looked at All Might's outstretched hand, then at the hero's determined, hopeful face. The despair was gone. The rage was a sleeping beast, acknowledged but contained. The will was returning, stronger than ever, now fueled by a power he was just beginning to understand. He was Izuku Midoriya. He had been told he was quirkless. He had been told he was a monster. He had been told he should give up. But now, All Might, the greatest hero in the world, was telling him that he could be more. He could be the one. He reached out his own hand, the one not adorned with the azure ring, and placed it in All Might's. It was a frail hand, but his grip was firm, filled with a newfound purpose. "Okay," Izuku said, and for the first time that day, a genuine, watery smile touched his lips. The azure ring on his finger flared, casting a brilliant blue promise into the night. "I accept." The sun had not yet risen, but Dagoba Beach was already alive with a particular kind of energy. It was the energy of a 14-year-old boy trying to move a mountain of rust, one discarded refrigerator at a time. 10 months. All Might had given him 10 months to prepare his body for the UA entrance exam and, more importantly, to become a worthy vessel for One for All. "The problem, young Midoriya," All Might had explained on their first official day of training, standing in his skeletal form with a meticulously detailed workout plan titled Aim to Pass, American Dream Plan, "is that you are currently a teacup trying to hold the ocean. My quirk, One for All, is a hurricane of pure, stockpiled power. If I were to pour it into you now, your limbs would blow right off your body." The image was both cartoonish and terrifyingly plausible. Izuku, who had spent the night before in a state of euphoric, hopeful disbelief, was brought crashing back to earth. This wasn't going to be a simple transfer of power. This was going to be a crucible. And so, his life had found a new, punishing rhythm. Before the sun rose, he would meet All Might at the beach. After school, he would return to the beach. He cleaned, he hauled, he lifted, he ran. He moved so much trash that his muscles existed in a state of perpetual, screaming agony. His hands, once soft and ink-stained, were now a cartographer's map of calluses, blisters, and scars. But this was far more than a simple physical regimen. The beach wasn't just his gym, it was his laboratory. He wasn't just forging his body, he was forging a spectrum. "Your quirk, young Midoriya, is both a magnificent gift and a terrible liability," All Might mused one morning, watching Izuku strain to drag a waterlogged sofa across the sand. It is inextricably linked to your emotional state. To master it is to master yourself. We cannot train your body without training your mind. Thus began the most difficult part of his education. He had to learn to summon, channel, and control three distinct, powerful, and often contradictory emotions on command. It was like learning to be a virtuoso musician, a method actor, and a world-class athlete all at the same time. The green of will, the foundation. The green lantern energy was his default, his most familiar tool. It was the power he had spent a decade unconsciously trying to understand. Now, under All Might's guidance, he was learning to wield it with purpose. Willpower isn't just stubbornness, my boy. All Might called out, perched atop a mountain of tires like a gaunt gargoyle. It is focused intent. It is the clear, unwavering vision of a goal and the drive to make it a reality. Your constructs are reflections of your mind. If your mind is cluttered, your constructs will be weak. The first few weeks were a disaster. Izuku would try to create a simple crowbar to pry a rusted car door off its hinges. Fueled by his sheer will to succeed, the green ring would snap to life on his finger, humming with power. But the crowbar he formed would be wobbly, its edges soft and indistinct. It would bend or shatter the moment he applied pressure. You are thinking about too many things, All Might critiqued. You are thinking about passing the exam, about not disappointing me, about what Bakugo would say. That is not pure will. That is anxiety. Clear your mind. Focus only on the task at hand. See the crowbar. Understand its form, its function, its strength. Will it into being. It was meditation through extreme physical labor. Izuku learned to enter a state of intense focus. As he hauled a bundle of corroded pipes, he wouldn't think about the weight. He would focus on the image of the pipes sitting on the clean patch of sand. When the green light appeared, he would channel that singular, clear goal into it. Slowly his control improved. The wobbly crowbars became solid. He learned to create constructs that were complex and functional. He formed a massive green shovel to move mountains of sand, a powerful, multi-pronged grappling hook to snag debris from the surf, and even a rudimentary crane, its arm lifting heavy appliances with a low hum of energy. The green light was his workhorse. It was the power of building, of creating, of imposing order on chaos. Every piece of trash he moved with a green construct was a victory, a testament to his growing mental fortitude. It was exhausting, requiring immense concentration, but it was a clean exhaustion. It left him physically spent but mentally sharp, his will honed to a razor's edge. The blue of hope, the fuel, the blue lantern energy was a different beast entirely. It was not a tool for direct action. It was a wellspring. Hope is not the same as will, All Might explained, a rare, thoughtful look on his face. Will is the engine. Hope is the high-octane fuel you pour into it. It is the belief that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. It is the calm certainty of a better tomorrow. Izuku struggled with this concept. He was hopeful, yes, more hopeful than he had been in his entire life. But how did one weaponize a feeling of optimism? He discovered it by accident. He was trying to lift an enormous, water-filled industrial freezer, a task that was beyond the limits of his physical strength and his standard green constructs. He had created a large green platform to lift it from below, but the construct was straining, flickering at the edges under the immense weight. It was about to shatter. I can't do this, he thought, despair creeping in. The green light wavered, weakening. No! All Might's voice cut through his doubt. Do not falter, young Midoriya. Remember why you are here. Envision the hero you will become. See yourself standing victorious at UA. Believe in that future. Izuku closed his eyes, the strain making his body tremble. He pushed away the image of failure and focused on the promise All Might had made to him. He saw himself in a UA uniform, not as a dream, but as an inevitable reality. He saw himself saving people, a calm, reassuring smile on his face. He felt the serene certainty that he was on the right path, that all this pain and effort would lead to something wonderful. A soft, melodic hum filled the air. The blue ring materialized on his other hand, its azure light a stark, beautiful contrast to the emerald glow. It didn't add another construct. Instead, it bathed his green platform in its calming light. The effect was instantaneous. The flickering green light stabilized, its color deepening. The platform, which had been on the verge of collapse, solidified, its structure reinforced by an unseen power. With a groan of protesting metal, the freezer lifted smoothly into the air. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. He wasn't pushing harder. He wasn't concentrating more. He was just hoping. You see? All Might said, a proud smile on his face. Hope does not build the house, my boy. But it reinforces the foundation so that the walls will never crumble. It makes your will absolute. From then on, the blue light became an integral part of his training. When his will wavered under a heavy load, he would summon the feeling of hope, of his promise to All Might, and use its azure glow to bolster his green constructs, making them stronger, more durable, and more resilient. It was a symbiotic relationship. Hope fueled will, and the successful application of will gave him more reason to hope. The red of rage, the weapon of last resort. Then there was the red light. The crimson stain. He was terrified of it. After the incident with the sludge villain, Izuku wanted nothing more than to forget that monstrous power even existed. He refused to even think about it for the first 2 months of his training. All Might would not allow it. You cannot ignore a part of yourself, young Midoriya, he said sternly one evening, as Izuku was packing up. That power, that rage, it is within you. To pretend it does not exist is to leave a loaded weapon in the hands of a stranger. You must learn to face it, to understand it, and to control it. A hero who is afraid of his own power is a danger to everyone. Izuku trembled. But it's monstrous. It's not heroic. Rage itself is not evil. All Might countered, his voice firm. The rage against injustice, the fury at those who would harm the innocent, that is a righteous fire. It is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. You used it to destroy a villain who was about to kill your friend. Your intent was heroic, even if your control was lacking. Now you will learn control. Their training for the red light was completely different. They moved to a secluded corner of the beach, far from any prying eyes. All Might set up a target, a single, reinforced, and thoroughly useless concrete block. I do not want you to create constructs, All Might instructed. Not yet. The rage is too volatile. I want you to touch it, to feel it, and to release it in a single, controlled burst. No more, no less. This was the hardest training of all. To summon rage, Izuku had to revisit the darkest corners of his psyche. He had to think about the years of bullying, the condescending sneers, the explosions in his face. He had to think of the sludge villain, of Bakugo's suffocating terror. He had to remember the look on Shigaraki's face later at the USJ, the casual cruelty. He had to dredge up every instance of injustice he had ever witnessed. The first time he tried, the crimson ring flared to life, and with it came that familiar, sickening heat, the red mist at the edge of his vision. He screamed, and a torrent of red plasma erupted from his hand, missing the concrete block entirely and carving a deep, sizzling trench in the sand. The blast lasted for 3 whole seconds before he managed to cut it off, collapsing to his knees, panting and shaking, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. Too much! Too long! All Might barked. You let it control you! You must be the master, not the slave! Touch the anger, do not drown in it! Day after day, they practiced. It was emotionally and spiritually draining. Each session left Izuku feeling hollowed out, disgusted with himself for having to access that dark place. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to gain a sliver of control. He learned to feel the rage welling up, to recognize the tipping point where it would consume him. He learned to channel it, to hold it for a single, incandescent moment, and then unleash it. The wild, spewing torrents became shorter. A 3-second blast became a 1-second burst. A 1-second burst became a half-second pulse. Finally, after months of torturous practice, he achieved his goal. He stood before the concrete block, took a deep breath, and focused his mind on a single, burning injustice. The red ring flared. He pointed his finger like a pistol. Vwum! A tight, focused beam of crimson energy, no wider than a baseball, shot out and struck the concrete block dead center. It didn't explode. It was simply gone. A perfect, clean hole was bored straight through it, the edges glowing cherry red for a moment before cooling. Izuku stood there, breathing heavily, but he wasn't screaming. He wasn't lost in the red haze. He was in control. He felt the immense strain, the lingering echo of the anger, but he was still himself. He looked at his hand, then at All Might. The hero nodded, a look of grim approval on his face. Good. That is a weapon. A dangerous, exhausting weapon of last resort. You will only ever use it when there is no other option. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Izuku breathed, the words carrying a new weight. He had faced the monster within and, for now, had put a leash on it. Synergy, strain, and the advent of One for All. As the months wore on, Izuku's body transformed. The scrawny, timid boy was replaced by a lean, wiry youth, his frame corded with hard-earned muscle. He could now move refrigerators by himself, without the aid of his quirk. He had cleaned the entire beach, turning the hazardous junkyard into a pristine, beautiful coastline. He had made his body a fitting vessel. The day came when All Might deemed him ready. On the morning of the UA exam, as the sun rose over the clean beach, the symbol of peace plucked a single hair from his head. Eat this, he said. Izuku's reaction was one of pure, unadulterated confusion. Ha! To inherit my power, you have to ingest my DNA. That's how it works, All Might explained with a shrug. Now hurry up! You'll be late for the exam. With a deep sense of bewilderment and a silent prayer, Izuku choked down the strand of golden hair. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a strange warmth spread through him, a feeling of immense, dormant power settling deep within his bones. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface, completely different from the emotional energies of his own quirk. One for All was now a part of him, but this fusion created an unforeseen and dangerous complication. One for All was a physical quirk. It coursed through his muscles and sinews. His emotional spectrum quirk was a mental and spiritual power, originating from his mind and soul. The two systems were not designed to work together. Trying to use them simultaneously was like trying to run two different operating systems on the same computer at once. The result was a system crash. He discovered this in the most painful way possible during the exam itself. He had entered the practical exam site, a sprawling cityscape, with a surge of confidence. He primarily used his green willpower, creating nets to disable the one-point robots and barriers to protect other examinees, racking up rescue points. But then the zero-pointer appeared, a colossal machine that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. When he saw Uraraka trapped beneath the rubble, he knew a simple green construct wouldn't be enough. His first instinct was to combine his powers. He activated One for All, feeling the crackling, unfamiliar power surge through his legs and arm. At the same time, he tried to summon a green battering ram, focusing his will on the image of shattering the robot's head. The feedback was instantaneous and catastrophic. A blinding pain shot through his head, as if his brain was being torn in two. The green energy from his ring sputtered violently, lashing out in uncontrolled whips of light. The immense physical energy of One for All, with no clear mental direction, threatened to tear his arm from its socket. It was a total system overload. His vision went black for a terrifying second, and he nearly collapsed. He couldn't use both at once. Not yet. The physical strain of OFA and the mental strain of his lantern rings were too much. It was a choice: raw, devastating physical power, or versatile, controllable energy constructs. In that split second, with Uraraka's life on the line, he made his choice. He let go of his will, letting the green light fade. He focused every ounce of his being on One for All, channeling that terrifying, untamed power into a single, desperate action. He leaped, and with a scream of smash, he delivered a 100% punch that obliterated the zero-pointer's head, and shattered his own arm and both his legs in the process. Later, lying in Recovery Girl's infirmary, the pain a dull throb, the lesson was brutally clear. He had two incredible wellsprings of power, but they were fundamentally incompatible in their current state. Your body and mind are still learning to speak to each other, young Midoriya, All Might told him gravely after the exam. One for All is a roaring physical furnace. Your emotional spectrum is a delicate, intricate loom. Trying to operate both at full power will only result in you being torn apart. The path forward was now clear. His training had not ended at Dagoba Beach. It had just begun. He had to learn to bridge the gap between his two quirks. He had to find a way to make the furnace and the loom work in harmony. He had to master not just his body, not just his emotions, but the very connection between them. He had passed the exam. He was a student of UA High School. But as he looked at his newly healed arm, he knew the real test, the forging of a true, unified spectrum of power, had only just begun. The gates of UA High School were less like an entrance, and more like a gateway to a different world. They were colossal, futuristic, and imposing, a clear statement that those who passed through them were leaving the realm of ordinary life behind. For Izuku Midoriya, walking through them on his first day, they were the culmination of a 10-month crucible and a 14-year dream. He clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, the phantom hum of one for all a subtle vibration in his bones, a secret he shared only with the clear blue sky above. His arm and legs, shattered into so many pieces during the entrance exam, had been flawlessly mended by Recovery Girl's quirk. The physical pain was gone, but the memory of the system overload, the blinding agony of trying to use OFA and his willpower simultaneously, was a stark and sobering reminder of his limitations. He was a student at his dream school, but he was a powerhouse with a broken fuse box. Finding Class 1A was an adventure in itself. The hallways were vast, the ceilings impossibly high, and the students bustling around him were a vibrant tapestry of mutations and visible power. He saw a girl with pink skin and horns, a boy with multiple arms, and someone who appeared to be made of living rock. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He was one of them. The thought sent a pulse of serene, blue hope through him, a quiet hum on his finger that only he could feel. And then he saw the door to Class 1A. It was ridiculously, absurdly large, probably to accommodate students with size-altering quirks. He took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the handle. This was it. He was so lost in the moment that he almost didn't notice the two figures already standing there. "Get your feet off that desk!" a stern, sharp voice commanded. "Such an action is an insult to our upperclassmen and the master craftsmen who built this furniture. Like I care," came the gruff, familiar reply. "What junior high you from, you stuck-up extra?" Izuku peeked inside. There, with his feet propped up with an air of supreme arrogance, was Katsuki Bakugo. And standing over him, chopping the air with rigid, robotic hand gestures, was the tall, bespectacled boy from the entrance exam, the one who had tried to reprimand him for muttering. "Tenya Ida?" Before Izuku could retreat, a cheerful voice called his name. "Oh hey! It's you! The plain-looking boy!" He turned to see Achiko Uraraka, the kind girl with the gravity quirk he had saved, or rather, who had saved him from becoming a permanent pavement pancake after his calamitous punch. Her face was bright, and her smile was genuine. "I'm so glad you got in," she bubbled. "That punch was amazing! So much power! And then you were all like BM, and I was like W Choi!" She mimed a massive explosion with her hands. Thank you," Izuku stammered, a blush creeping up his neck. The blue hope in his chest was now competing with a fierce wave of social anxiety. "It's good to see you too, Uraraka." Her presence seemed to draw the attention of the others. Ida marched over, his movements precise and purposeful. "Good morning. I am Tenya Ida from Somei Private Academy." He bowed stiffly. "I must apologize for my behavior at the entrance exam. You saw the true nature of that test, while I did not. You are the superior student. I misjudged you." Izuku was floored. "Oh no, not at all. I was just—" He was saved from having to explain himself by a new voice, a drawl so tired it sounded like it was physically painful to speak. "If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." Everyone turned. Lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, zipped into a yellow sleeping bag like a miserable, life-sized caterpillar, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a scruffy beard. He took a long, slow sip from a juice pouch. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the caterpillar man droned. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. My name is Shota Aizawa, and I am your homeroom teacher." He unzipped himself and rose, revealing a surprisingly athletic build beneath his rumpled black jumpsuit and the strange, bandage-like scarf around his neck. The friendly, welcoming atmosphere of Class 1A evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of dread. "Put these on," Aizawa said, tossing a set of blue UE tracksuits onto his desk. "Meet me on the athletic field." Now, the quirk assessment test was a gauntlet. Aizawa explained his logic with a chilling lack of emotion. The government was too slow to standardize its testing, so he would do it himself. He would push them to their limits, and the student who ranked last would be judged to have no potential and would be expelled on the spot. A wave of panic swept through the class. Expulsion? On the first day, Izuku felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. But as he looked at Aizawa's tired, calculating eyes, he felt something else, too. A surge of defiant will. "I will not be expelled. I earned my place here. I will prove it." The familiar green ring flickered into existence, a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. He couldn't use one for all. Not safely. Aizawa's first test, the 50-meter dash, made that clear. Bakugo had used his explosions to propel himself across the line in just over 4 seconds. Izuku knew a 100% OFA dash would be fast, but it would also mean 2 broken legs and an immediate trip to the infirmary. He couldn't risk it, so he relied on his own quirk. For the long jump, while others used their powers to leap, Izuku stood at the edge of the sandpit. He focused his will, and a flat, emerald-green platform snapped into existence just beyond his reach. He took a running start, leaped onto the shimmering construct, and then willed a second platform to appear further on, then a third. He chain-jumped across the entire pit, landing softly on the other side. For the grip strength test, he created a green construct that perfectly molded to the device, then willed it to squeeze with force far beyond his physical capabilities. The machine beeped, displaying a number that made the other students murmur in surprise. The ball throw was his real chance to shine. He stood in the circle, the soft ball feeling small and insignificant in his hand. He watched Uraraka get in, Infinity, score by making her ball weightless. He knew what Aizawa expected of him, a repeat of the entrance exam's explosive punch. He could feel his teacher's gaze on him, waiting. Instead, Izuku focused his will. He pictured a slingshot. A massive, cosmic slingshot. A glowing green Y-shaped frame materialized in front of him, and a taut band of emerald energy stretched back. He placed the ball in the pocket. "My power isn't just breaking my own bones, sensei," he muttered to himself. He poured every ounce of his focused intent into the construct. "Fly farther than anyone else." He released it. With a sound like a thunderclap and a whip crack combined, the ball was launched. It became a white speck against the blue sky in an instant, leaving a faint green trail of energy behind it. The small device in Aizawa's hand beat furiously for several seconds before finally displaying a score, 801.6 meters. Aizawa looked at the number, then at Izuku. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips. "Not bad," he grunted. "Logical. You can control your output without self-destructing." Good. The praise, however minimal, was intoxicating. Izuku felt a surge of pride and hope. He was doing it. He was competing with the best of the best, using his own power, his own way. He was proving himself, but as he excelled, another's frustration grew into a burning inferno. "DKU!" Bakugo roared, his eyes wild with disbelief and fury. He charged at Izuku, his hands already sparking. "What was that? You've been lying to me all this time. First the red sludge, now this. You think you're better than me?" Before he could reach Izuku, he was stopped dead in his tracks, tangled in Aizawa's capture weapon. His explosion sputtered and died. "Stand down," Aizawa ordered, his own eyes glowing a menacing red, his hair floating eerily. "Don't make me use my quirk on you. I'm getting dry-eyed just looking at you." It was then that Izuku realized the truth. Aizawa's quirk was erasure. He could cancel out other quirks just by looking at them. And he had been watching Izuku the whole time, ready to shut him down if he tried to use one for all. The expulsion threat, the tests, it was all a logical, if ruthless, way to gauge their true potential and control. Izuku survived the day. He didn't place first. That honor went to the recommended student, Momo Yaoyorozu, but he placed solidly in the middle of the pack. He hadn't broken a single bone. He had proven he belonged. The student who was expelled, Minoru Mineta, was deemed to have a quirk with limited versatility and a poor attitude. Aizawa's logical ruse about the expulsion had been a lie to push them, but his judgment was real. The next few days were a blur of standard high school classes and intense hero basic training. All Might, in his booming hero form, was their teacher. Izuku had to endure the man's over-the-top praise while trying to act like they were virtual strangers. It was an awkward, nerve-wracking dance. Then came the battle trial. Indoor combat. Teams of 2, heroes versus villains. Izuku was paired with the person he felt most comfortable with, Uraraka. Their opponents, chosen by lottery, were the worst possible combination, Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. The moment the pairings were announced, a chill went down Izuku's spine. Bakugo's eyes locked onto him from across the room, and they burned with an obsessive, murderous light. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was a reckoning. Their objective was to secure a dummy nuclear weapon guarded by the villains in a 5-story building. Izuku and Uraraka were the heroes. As they stood outside, waiting for the signal to begin, Izuku's mind raced. His notebooks were filled with analyses of heroes, but now he had to analyze his classmates. Ida was fast, strategic, and would play the part of a villain perfectly. Bakugo was a heat-seeking missile, and Izuku was his only target. He's not going to care about the bomb, Izuku explained to Uraraka, his voice low and tense. He's coming for me. It's personal. This is our advantage. We can use his tunnel vision against him. The plan was simple. They would enter together. Izuku would draw Bakugo's attention, leading him on a chase, while Uraraka would use her zero-gravity quirk to sneak past and find the objective. The signal blared. They slipped into the building through a first-floor window. The interior was a maze of concrete hallways and blind corners. It was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. They rounded a corner, and he was there. Bakugo ambushed them, launching himself forward with a massive explosion that shook the entire building. Izuku reacted on instinct, shoving Uraraka out of the way and summoning a green shield just in time. The blast slammed into it, and while the shield held, the concussive force sent Izuku flying backward. The right side of his hero costume was singed and torn. "Come on, Deku!" Bakugo snarled, his face contorted in a terrifying grin. "Don't dodge. Let's fight." This was wrong. Bakugo wasn't supposed to find them this fast. He was smarter, more tactical than Izuku had given him credit for. His plan was already falling apart. "Uraraka, go!" Izuku shouted, scrambling to his feet. "Find the bomb. I'll hold him off." Uraraka hesitated, her face pale with worry. "But Deku, you're—" "Go!" She nodded and disappeared down another hallway. Now it was just him and Bakugo. The air crackled with tension. The fight was a brutal, one-sided affair. Izuku was purely on the defensive. He used his green willpower to create shields, barriers, and platforms to evade Bakugo's relentless assault. Explosions rocked the hallway, blasting chunks of concrete from the walls. Bakugo was a hurricane of violence, his movements fluid and powerful, each blast perfectly timed, perfectly aimed. "You've been holding out on me for years, you damn nerd!" he roared, unleashing a volley of smaller, faster explosions. "Looking down on me with that stupid, emotionless face! Where did you get that quirk?" Izuku dodged and weaved, his mind racing. He couldn't win a direct fight. Bakugo was a natural-born combatant. All Izuku could do was survive, to buy Uraraka time. He used Aizawa's capture weapon, which he'd started practicing with after seeing his teacher in action, to try and bind Bakugo, but he was too fast, blasting the fabric away. He was being pushed back, cornered. Bakugo was preparing for a final, massive attack, pulling the pin on one of his grenade-like gauntlets. "Young Bakugo, stop!" All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. "You'll kill him! He'll be fine if he dodges!" Bakugo screamed back, aiming the gauntlet. A huge, devastating beam of explosive energy shot out, tearing up the entire hallway. Izuku barely managed to throw himself into a side room as the blast obliterated the wall where he'd been standing. The building shook. The dust and smoke were suffocating. Izuku was cornered, his body bruised and battered. He could hear Uraraka's voice through his earpiece. She had found the bomb, but Ida was guarding it too well. She couldn't get close. Time was running out. His initial plan had failed. His evasive tactics had failed. He was out of options. He looked at his hands. He could use one for all. A single, 100% smash would end the fight instantly. But it would break his arm, and he'd lose the match. More importantly, it would be an admission of defeat, a sign that his own power wasn't enough. He could use his red rage. He could feel it, a simmering ember in his gut, waiting for a spark. But the thought of unleashing that monstrous power here, in a school, against his classmate, it was unthinkable. He was trapped. Failure seemed inevitable. And with that thought, a new, cold emotion began to creep in. It wasn't the despair from the rooftop. It wasn't the righteous anger he felt for villains. It was a cold, sharp, and deeply personal fear. It was the fear of failing Uraraka, his first real friend at this school. The fear of failing All Might, who had put all his faith in him. The fear of proving Bakugo right, that he was, and always would be, a useless Deku who couldn't win. It was the fear of his own powerlessness, the terror of having all this potential but being unable to use it when it mattered most. This fear was different from the panic he'd felt before. It was focused. It was potent. It was a weapon in its own right, and as this cold, sharp terror crested within him, a new sound pierced the ringing in his ears. It wasn't a chime, a hum, or a shriek. It was a low, guttural thrum, like the vibration of a predator's growl. A new light sputtered into existence on his index finger. It was not green, red, or blue. It was a sickly, burning gold, the color of molten metal and a jaundiced eye. The light was harsh and unpleasant, and it swirled into a ring that felt cold to the touch, leaching the warmth from his skin. It pulsed with a menacing, intimidating energy. This was the light of fear. Bakugo stormed through the hole he'd blasted in the wall, his face a mask of victory. Nowhere left to run, Deku. Izuku got to his feet, his body aching. The golden ring on his finger pulsed. He didn't know what it did. He didn't know how to use it. But he was desperate. He acted on instinct. He didn't want to hurt Bakugo. He just wanted to stop him. To make him hesitate. What was Bakugo's greatest fear? It wasn't losing. It was being seen as weak, as secondary. It was the fear of being surpassed by the one person he'd always considered a pebble in his path. Izuku raised his hand, the golden ring flaring. He channeled his own fear, his fear of failure, into the ring, but he shaped it with an image from Bakugo's perspective. He didn't create a monster or a weapon, he created a symbol. The golden light shot from the ring and coalesced in the air between them. It formed a perfect, shimmering, life-size construct of Izuku himself. But this wasn't the real, trembling Izuku. This construct stood tall, its expression calm and confident. Its eyes glowed with an unnerving golden light, and on its hand, a brilliant green ring pulsed with immense, overwhelming power, far greater than anything Izuku had ever actually produced. It was an illusion. A projection of Bakugo's deepest anxiety. Bakugo stopped dead in his tracks, his victorious sneer vanishing. He stared at the golden phantom of his rival, at the image of Deku wielding the kind of power he'd always dreamed of. For a split second, the illusion was more real than reality. The construct was an embodiment of his fear that the quirkless, useless nerd had secretly been a giant all along, looking down on him. "Wah, what the hell is that?" Bakugo stammered, his confidence finally cracking. That single moment of hesitation was all Izuku needed. It wasn't a weapon to dominate. It was a tool to create an opening. While Bakugo was distracted by the golden phantom, Izuku acted. He put his plan, his final, desperate gambit, into motion. "Uraraka, now!" he yelled into his earpiece. "Use your quirk on yourself! Get ready to swing!" Then, he did the one thing Bakugo never expected. He charged at him. Not to fight, but to pass. He'll be fine if he dodges, Izuku thought, a grim echo of Bakugo's own words. He channeled one for all. Not into his whole arm. Just a tiny fraction, into a single finger. But at the same time, he activated his will, his hope, and his newfound fear. Green, blue, and gold light flared on his fingers all at once. It was a chaotic, unstable cocktail of power, and the feedback was agonizing, a searing migraine that threatened to split his skull. But he held it for one crucial second. He didn't aim a punch at Bakugo. He aimed it at the ceiling. Smash! The punch wasn't a 100% blast. It was a controlled, upward explosion of force, augmented and directed by the combined, unstable energies of his rings. The resulting shockwave tore through the entire building. The ceiling above them disintegrated, sending a cascade of debris raining down through every floor. Upstairs, on the 5th floor, Ida and Uraraka were thrown off balance by the violent tremor. What was that? Ida cried, struggling to stay upright. Comet home run! Uraraka yelled. Weightless, she had grabbed a pillar and used the building's shaking as her signal. She swung the massive chunk of concrete like a baseball bat, sending a hailstorm of debris flying at Ida. While the villain was distracted by the barrage, she floated over his head and touched the bomb. The hero team wins! All Might's voice boomed over the speakers, just as Izuku collapsed to the floor, his body smoking, his mind a maelstrom of pain. His left arm was broken, his other fingers were fractured from the unstable energy backlash, and he was covered in bruises. The golden phantom dissolved into nothing. Bakugo stood frozen amidst the rubble, staring at the ceiling, then at the defeated form of Izuku. He hadn't been beaten by a punch. He had been beaten by a strategy born from a power he couldn't comprehend and a mind he had always underestimated. Izuku lay on the floor, drifting into unconsciousness. He had won. He hadn't given in to his rage. He had protected his friend. But he had paid a heavy price, and he had discovered a new, terrifying light in his emotional arsenal. A golden fear, born from his own feelings of failure, that he had somehow turned into a key to victory. The spectrum of his power, and his problems, had just gotten a whole lot wider.